Each recorded action speaks volumes. Every close observation uncovers facts. Protecting your civil rights, revealing definitive justice.
Show me your hands! Hands up! Hands up right now! Hands where I can see them! Stop! Hands up or I will tase you. Last warning! Last warning! Tasing.
A deaf woman drives through a checkpoint on a busy Minnesota highway, 38 years old, born profoundly deaf, certified American Sign Language interpreter, wears bilateral hearing aids in both ears. An ICE agent strides toward her vehicle. Large-scale federal immigration operation, 2:17 in the afternoon, bright daylight. The agent shouts commands. The woman cannot hear them. She is deaf. She signs in American Sign Language. I am deaf. She points to her hearing aids. Right ear, left ear, look, see, understand. I am deaf. The agent does not understand sign language. He sees the hand movements and reads them as threatening gestures. She reaches slowly for her phone, a text-to-speech app, and for her license and documents, trying to comply, trying to communicate. The agent draws his taser, fires 50,000 volts into her chest and shoulder while she is still holding her phone and papers. Her body seizes. She collapses sideways against the car door, gasping. A second agent arrives seconds later and stops cold. 2 large beige hearing aids. A blue disability placard hanging in plain view from the rearview mirror. Slow, open-handed movements captured on body cam in crystal clear afternoon light. This is Tonya Hamilton, 38 years old, certified ASL interpreter, born profoundly deaf, bilateral hearing aids, a hearing disability placard in her car. Tased for not hearing commands she could never have heard. For signing in American Sign Language the agent did not recognize. For pointing to hearing aids the agent refused to see. What no field agent at that checkpoint knew, what makes this case unlike almost any other, is what Tonya was doing at that checkpoint in the first place. This will cost $7 million. It will end one agent's career. It will force the most powerful federal enforcement agency in the country to finally see what had always been right in front of them. And the truth about who Tonya Hamilton actually was that day will change everything. If you are ready to see institutional racism taken down, like this video and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. And if this is your first time here, hit that subscribe button right now because you won't want to miss tomorrow's story of cops messing with the wrong people and finding out. Let me know if you enjoyed the story. Let's continue. 38 years before that checkpoint, Tonya Hamilton entered the world in silence. She was born profoundly deaf, bilateral sensorineural hearing loss, the kind that does not fluctuate, does not improve with age, and does not respond to surgery. Her auditory nerves did not transmit sound signals to the brain the way a hearing person's do. The world was not loud for Tonya. It was visual, tactile, spatial. It was entirely her own. Her parents discovered it when she was 10 months old and did not stir at the sound of a dropped pot in the kitchen. The audiologist's report confirmed what they had already begun to suspect. They grieved briefly, then they adapted, because that is what parents do, and because Tonya, even at 10 months, looked at them with the kind of steady attention that suggested she was already paying better attention than most. They learned American Sign Language together as a family. Her mother practiced vocabulary at the dinner table. Her father signed bedtime stories. By the time Tonya was 2, she was fluent. By the time she was 5, she was fitting bilateral hearing aids behind both ears, large beige devices that provided some degree of sound awareness without restoring anything resembling normal hearing. She could detect loud environmental sounds, she could sense vibrations, she could read the energy of a room, but spoken commands at a distance, through a closed car window, delivered at a shout by an agitated federal agent, those were not sounds her hearing aids were ever going to translate. She relied on what had always served her, lip reading, American Sign Language, and an extraordinary capacity for visual communication that she had been honing since before she could walk. She attended a school for the deaf through her high school years, where she was, by all accounts, both a rigorous student and a quietly fierce advocate, the kind of student who asked administrators the hard questions and then waited, without blinking, for the answer. She went on to Gallaudet University in Washington, D.C., the world's premier institution for deaf and hard of hearing students, where she studied interpretation and linguistics with a focus on bridging communication between deaf and hearing communities in institutional settings. She became a certified ASL interpreter. She worked hospitals, courtrooms, school systems, and social service agencies. She helped deaf patients understand complex diagnoses from doctors who had never been trained to communicate across that divide. She helped deaf defendants understand legal proceedings in courtrooms never designed to accommodate them. She stood in back corners of IEP meetings and made sure deaf children understood every word being spoken about their futures. She was patient, she was meticulous, she was, by the assessment of virtually everyone who worked alongside her, exceptionally good. And she had spent her entire life in a world not built for her, a hearing world that overlooked, underestimated, and occasionally forgot she existed. She was accustomed to explaining herself. She was accustomed to repeating herself. She was accustomed to the blank look people gave her when she pointed to her hearing aids and waited for the light to come on. Nothing in any of that had prepared her for what an ICE agent would do in 2:17 p.m. daylight on a Tuesday in Bloomington, Minnesota. But something else had. The checkpoint materialized across the westbound lanes of Interstate 494, like something assembled overnight orange cones funneling traffic into a single narrows. Federal vehicles parked at angles along the shoulder, agents in tactical gear moving with the calm efficiency of people who had run this operation before. It was a large-scale ICE immigration enforcement operation, one of several deployed across the Minnesota corridor that quarter as part of a federal pilot program. The afternoon sky was open and blue. Visibility was flawless. Tonya Hamilton's silver sedan rolled into the queue at 2:14. She had been driving this stretch of highway for years, commutes, client appointments, the particular silence of a long afternoon drive that a deaf woman navigates differently than a hearing one, attentive to every visual cue the road offers in place of sound. She saw the cones. She saw the agents. She slowed, signaled properly, and joined the line of vehicles waiting to be processed. By 2:17, she was at the front. ICE agent Victor Lang stepped away from the adjacent vehicle and moved toward her sedan before she had come to a complete stop. His right hand was already resting on the taser holstered at his hip, a posture that was, in the context of the checkpoint, unremarkable. He had processed dozens of vehicles that afternoon. His movements were practiced, his expression set into the neutral intensity that enforcement environments tend to produce. He began shouting commands while still 4 feet from her door. Tonya heard none of it. She was watching him approach through the windshield. She registered a man in federal gear, moving toward her with the efficient stride of someone who expected to be obeyed. She placed both hands flat on the top of the steering wheel, palms down, clearly visible. The universal posture of a driver who intends no trouble, and turned her head slowly toward the driver's side window to make eye contact. She offered a polite smile, the kind of smile that said, "I see you, I am cooperative, this will be fine." Then she began to sign. Her hands moved in textbook American Sign Language, deliberate, clear, unhurried. The sign for, "I am deaf." Both index fingers then rising to point directly at the large beige bilateral hearing aids visible behind each ear. The gestures were open-palmed, slow, and unambiguous to anyone with even basic familiarity with ASL or with deaf communication markers. Her body cam angle, the body cam attached to Agent Lang's chest, recorded every motion in full afternoon light, without shadow, without obstruction. Agent Lang saw hands moving. His face tightened. His posture shifted the slight forward lean of a man who has recategorized the situation. The open palm signing registered to him not as communication but as agitation. The pointing gesture, both index fingers aimed toward the sides of her head, registered not as a deaf woman indicating her hearing aids, but as something aggressive, something directed at him, his jaw set. His right hand closed around the taser. He kept shouting. Tonya, reading his body language and understanding that he had not understood her, reached slowly and visibly toward the passenger seat, a deliberate, unhurried movement, her arm crossing at low speed in front of her body to retrieve her phone and her license documents. The phone was unlocked, already open to the text-to-speech application she carried precisely for interactions like this one. The documents were folded inside a clear sleeve. She was, by every measure, attempting to comply. Agent Lang saw a reach. One final shouted warning, unheard. The taser fired. The twin probes crossed the distance between them in less than a heartbeat and struck Tonya Hamilton in the upper chest and left shoulder, delivering 50,000 volts into a woman who was still holding her phone and her papers. The electrical current locked every major muscle group simultaneously. Her hands seized, the phone dropped. The documents dropped. Her body folded sideways toward the car door in a convulsive collapse, not a fall, but a seizing, her muscles rigid and then releasing in waves, her face twisted in shock and pain, her chest unable to draw a full breath. Her mind did not go quiet. Even through the convulsions, some part of her was still signing. hands trembling and uncoordinated, tears already streaming. She was still forming the sign, I am deaf, I am deaf, the muscle memory of a lifetime asserting itself even as her body failed her. The body cam on Agent Lang's chest captured it, the hearing aids behind each ear gleaming in the afternoon sun. The blue disability placard hanging from the rearview mirror, the words, hearing disability, printed across its face in letters large enough to read from several feet away, her slow, open reach for documents. The phone, and the license sleeve on the floor of the passenger seat where they had fallen. Agent Emily Carter was already moving. She had been stationed 20 feet down the shoulder and heard the taser discharge before she saw it. She arrived at Tonia's vehicle at a jog, came around the front bumper, and stopped with her hand on the doorframe. She took in the scene in the span of 2 seconds, the woman convulsing in the driver's seat, the two large hearing aids behind her ears, the placard in the mirror, the papers on the floor. Carter crouched beside the open window and did the one thing her training had actually prepared her for. She spelled out 4 letters in the air, slowly, in the basic finger spelling she remembered from a single half-day workshop 3 years earlier. D-E-A-F. She did not know if Tonia could see her clearly enough to read it, but she signed it anyway. Behind her, Agent Victor Lang's hand came off the taser. His face, which had carried the expression of a man executing a threat assessment protocol, did something more complicated. The color left it. Paramedics arrived at 2:29. They removed the probes, treated the burns on Tonia's chest and shoulder, and monitored her elevated vital signs while she sat against the side of the sedan, wrapped in a reflective blanket, unable to speak and unwilling to stop signing the same phrase over and over to anyone in her field of vision. Agent Carter stayed at her side, communicating in typed notes on her phone, her face steady, and her voice, when she used it on the radio, very quiet. By 4 o'clock, Tonia was in an ambulance. By 4:40, she was in an emergency bay at Hennepin Healthcare. By 5:15, her mother, Patricia Hamilton, was in the corridor outside that bay, still wearing her coat, having driven directly from work without stopping. Patricia found her daughter sitting upright in a hospital bed, the burns on her chest covered with gauze, her hands moving through the account of the afternoon with the same precision she had always brought to her work, patient, clear, complete. Patricia watched her daughter's hands and did not interrupt. The family gathered as the evening wore on, and sometime after 9 o'clock, through a contact at the Civil Rights Division of a local law firm, a preliminary clip from the body cam footage arrived on a family member's phone short, unedited, shot in the full clarity of a Minnesota afternoon. They watched it in silence. Then they watched it again. The hearing aids, the placard, the slow reach, the signs. The outrage that moved through that hospital room was not loud. It was the particular kind of outrage that settles in low and cold, and does not leave the kind that does not ask what happened but only what is going to happen next. By the time visiting hours ended, the answer to that question had already been decided. They were going to fight. The body came back to itself slowly, the way bodies do after violence. In the days following the checkpoint, Tonia Hamilton recovered at home in Bloomington, the burns on her chest and shoulder dressed and redressed. The muscle soreness from the taser's electrical discharge deep and persistent in a way that no one had fully warned her about. She slept more than she expected to. She startled at vibrations she could not name. She stood at the window of her apartment on the first afternoon back and watched a car slow at the corner below, and felt a cold that had nothing to do with the weather. She did not drive. While Tonia rested, her mother and sister sat across from civil rights attorney Elena Brooks in a conference room in downtown Minneapolis, a laptop open on the table between them. Brooks was methodical and quiet, the kind of attorney who allowed evidence to do most of the talking and reserved her own voice for moments when silence was no longer sufficient. She had handled federal excessive force cases for 11 years. She had seen body cam footage weaponized by defense teams, edited selectively, presented in ways that turned clear violations into ambiguous incidents. What she was watching now was not ambiguous. The footage ran 3 minutes and 42 seconds from the moment Agent Lang's body cam picked up Tonia's silver sedan in the queue. The afternoon light was even and unobstructed. Every frame was clear. Brooks paused it at the 11-second mark, both of Tonia's hearing aids visible behind her ears, catching the light, and again at the 20-second mark, where the blue disability placard was legible through the windshield. She paused it a third time at 41 seconds, where Tonia's hands moved through the ASL sign for I am deaf in slow, open-palmed clarity, both index fingers pointing directly to the devices behind her ears. The defense was going to argue split-second decision-making. Brooks had heard that argument before. She had also learned, over 11 years, exactly where split-second decision-making arguments went to die, and they died here, in footage like this, where every marker was visible, and every movement was slow, and every moment of the encounter had been recorded in a format that a jury could watch on a screen large enough to see a hearing aid gleaming from 10 feet away. She told the family they had a strong case. Then she told them what she had found beneath it. Victor Lang had 5 prior excessive force complaints on file. 5. Not one had resulted in disciplinary action. Each had involved a black individual or an immigrant detainee. Each had been processed through the agency's internal review structure and closed without sustained findings. The complaints existed, they were documented, they were time-stamped, but they had been filed in the bureaucratic dark, invisible to the public record, functionally buried. Brooks had them now. The medical records were already in order. Tonia's audiological history dating to infancy, bilateral sensorineural hearing loss, confirmed by multiple specialists across 38 years, hearing aid prescriptions renewed annually, documentation of the limitations of amplification technology for individuals with her degree of loss. The record was not thin. It was not ambiguous. It was the kind of evidence that closed off every alternative narrative a defense team might try to construct. And then there was the memo. Brooks had obtained it through a targeted document request, and she read it twice before she told the family what it said. The memo was internal to ICE headquarters. It was dated 4 months before the checkpoint incident. It confirmed, in formal bureaucratic language, that Tonia Hamilton, named, identified by her credentials and professional history, had been engaged by the agency as an undercover disability compliance consultant for the pilot program operating in the Minnesota corridor. She had been brought in precisely because the agency recognized that its field personnel lacked training in ADA accommodations for deaf and hard of hearing individuals encountered during enforcement operations. She was there to observe. She was there to advise. She was there, without the knowledge of any field agent, to help the agency understand what it was getting wrong. Agent Victor Lang had tased the expert sent to prevent exactly what he had done. The irony was so complete it was almost architectural. The same institutional failure that had created the incident had also arranged for its own most devastating witness. The agency had reached into the deaf community, selected the most qualified person it could find, and invited her into the operation, and then, through the precise failure she had been hired to identify, had electrocuted her on camera in bright daylight. The narration pauses here. Look at this frame. Look at the hearing aids in that afternoon light. Look at the placard. Look at her hands. If visible disability markers and a federal consultant's invitation mean nothing without training to back them up, if this is the gap the system still cannot close, then type "see the signs" in the comments right now and share this video. Not for outrage, for accountability. Because the more people who understand what real systemic failure looks like, the harder it becomes to bury it. Brooks held the memo as sealed evidence, its disclosure timed for trial, when its impact would be felt by the people who needed to feel it most. What she filed in federal court was already substantial. Excessive force in violation of the Fourth Amendment, failure to accommodate a known disability under the Americans with Disabilities Act, failure to train, and deprivation of civil rights under color of federal authority. The complaint was 63 pages. It named Agent Victor Lang and ICE directly. Tonia read the filing in her apartment on a Sunday evening, her mother beside her on the couch, her sister standing near the window. She read every page. Then she set it down on the coffee table and sat with it for a long moment, her hands still in her lap. When she finally signed, she signed to her family rather than to any room full of strangers, slowly, without performance, the same precision she brought to everything. She was not doing this for herself alone. She was doing it for every deaf person who would someday sit in a car with their hands visible and their aids behind their ears and face an agent who had never been taught to see them. She was doing it because the system had already told her, in 50,000 volts and crystal clear afternoon footage, exactly what it believed she was worth. She intended to show it otherwise. The evidence package went to Attorney Brooks the following Thursday. Every document, every record, every medical file, and every piece of the growing portrait of a case that would not settle quietly. The family drove together. Patricia Hamilton carried the box to the door of the law office. Tonia walked in first. 14 months is a long time to carry 50,000 volts. It is long enough to develop new reflexes, a hypervigilance at the wheel, a flinch at the sight of federal vehicles, a recalibration of the ordinary that most people take for granted. Tonya Hamilton drove again. Eventually, she drove the route she had always driven, through the corridor she had always used. But the checkpoint stretched the westbound narrows on Interstate 494 where the orange cones had been. She gave that stretch several weeks longer than the rest. By the time the federal courtroom in Minneapolis filled for trial, 14 months after the incident, the healing was neither complete nor performed. It was simply ongoing, the way it tends to be. The courtroom held the weight of the case without difficulty. Federal courts in Minneapolis are built for weight. The gallery filled with observers from deaf advocacy organizations, federal civil rights groups, and journalism outlets covering the intersection of disability law and enforcement accountability. Attorney Brooks arrived with a case that had been assembled with the patience of someone who had never expected the defense to concede a single point and had prepared accordingly. She was right. ICE's legal team led with split-second decision-making and the established doctrine of qualified immunity, arguing that Agent Lang's threat assessment, however mistaken, had been made in good faith during an active enforcement operation under conditions that did not clearly establish a constitutional violation. It was a familiar argument. It had worked before, in other courtrooms, against other plaintiffs, with less evidence. The body cam footage went up on the courtroom screen at 9:47 on the second morning. 3 minutes and 42 seconds. The gallery watched in silence. The jury, 7 women and 5 men, 3 of whom wore glasses, 2 of whom had visible hearing aids of their own, watched without expression, which is not the same as watching without feeling. Brooks let the footage speak for itself for the full runtime. Then she paused it at 3 separate frames, the hearing aids at 11 seconds, the placard at 20 seconds, the signing hands at 41 seconds. She let those frames sit on the screen for a long moment before moving on. The expert witnesses came in sequence. A board-certified audiologist testified to the nature of Tonya's bilateral sensorineural hearing loss, its depth, its permanence, its specific and documented effect on speech comprehension at distance. She explained to the jury exactly what bilateral hearing aids do and do not do, what a person with Tonya's documented hearing profile can and cannot process through amplification alone. The audiologist's testimony took 90 minutes and was thorough enough that, by its end, the jury had a cleaner understanding of sensorineural hearing loss than most people acquire in a lifetime of proximity to the deaf community. A professor of American Sign Language Studies demonstrated the exact signs Tonya had used at the window of her sedan slowly, in the open, facing the jury, with the kind of deliberate clarity that is indistinguishable from textbook execution. He explained the pointing gesture. He explained the hearing aid indication. He explained that the sequence of signs Tonya had produced, in the order and manner she had produced them, constituted one of the clearest possible communications available to a deaf person in an unplanned encounter with a hearing authority figure. There was no ambiguity in what she had signed. There was only an agent who had not known what he was looking at. A former ICE Training Division chief, retired, unaffiliated with the agency's current legal defense, testified under subpoena that as of the date of the incident, no mandatory disability awareness training existed for field personnel conducting checkpoint operations, no training on recognizing hearing aids, no training on basic ASL recognition, no training on disability placards or their significance, no protocol for initiating alternative communication with individuals displaying visible disability markers, nothing. The defense cross-examined all 3. The cross-examinations were competent and inconclusive. Then Attorney Brooks introduced the memo. The sealed ICE document, the one confirming Tonya Hamilton's identity as the agency's own undercover disability compliance consultant for the pilot program in the Minnesota corridor, entered the record at 11:23 on the 4th morning of trial. Brooks read its key provisions into the record in a voice that remained absolutely level, because the document did not need emphasis. It was emphasis. The agency had identified a gap in its disability awareness capacity. The agency had reached into the professional deaf community and selected Tonya Hamilton specifically because of her expertise. The agency had deployed her to the checkpoint, undercover, to observe and advise, and the agency's own field personnel, operating without the training she had been brought in to help create, had electrocuted her before she could say a word. Victor Lang took the stand the following morning. Under cross-examination, he admitted he had never received training on hearing aids. He admitted he had never received training on American Sign Language recognition. He admitted he had not been instructed to check for disability placards during checkpoint operations. He admitted that the pointing gesture Tonia had made, both index fingers directed toward the large beige devices behind her ears, had registered in his threat assessment as movement toward the head rather than communication. About the head. He was not a monster on the stand. He was something more troubling than that. He was a product. The jury deliberated for 2 hours and 40 minutes. They returned liability findings on every count. The settlement that followed was $7 million. $2,800,000 to Tonia Hamilton, directly medical costs, lost income, pain and suffering, and emotional distress, calculated across the 14 months of treatment, therapy, and diminished professional capacity that followed the checkpoint. The remainder in punitive damages assessed against the agency and against Victor Lang personally for $250,000, an amount calculated to carry consequence. Lang was terminated. His 5 prior excessive force complaints were reopened, and all 5 were sustained. The Department of Justice opened a full pattern and practice investigation into ICE's checkpoint operations within 30 days of the verdict. The investigation concluded with a consent decree, a binding federal agreement that mandated nationwide disability awareness training for all ICE and federal enforcement personnel, mandatory modules on bilateral hearing aids, their appearance and purpose, basic ASL recognition, disability placard protocols, de-escalation procedures for encounters where communication barriers are visible or suspected, implementation timelines, compliance monitoring, systemic change in writing with teeth. Tonia Hamilton founded the Hamilton Center for Deaf Justice 6 months after the verdict closed. She used a portion of the settlement to build what she had always believed the system needed, but had never bothered to build for itself: a free, professionally developed curriculum on deaf communication, disability awareness, and ADA compliance in enforcement settings. The curriculum became, within 18 months, the foundational training module required for every new ICE recruit. She became the first civilian trainer in the agency's history invited to teach the induction cohort. She stood at the front of a government training room, bilateral hearing aids visible behind each ear, and showed them the body cam footage. All 3 minutes and 42 seconds of it. She showed them the hearing aids at 11 seconds, the placard at 20, the signing hands at 41. She showed them what had been right in front of a federal agent in bright afternoon daylight and had not been seen. And then, in American Sign Language that a certified interpreter rendered for the room, she showed them how to see it. Some months after the Hamilton Center launched, on an afternoon in early autumn, Tonia drove the westbound corridor of Interstate 494. The cones were gone. The checkpoint had not operated there since the consent decree. The stretch of highway looked like every other stretch of highway: 4 lanes, a gray shoulder, the flat Minnesota sky going wide above the tree line. She drove past the spot without slowing. Her hands were steady on the wheel. She glanced at the rearview mirror once the blue placard swinging gently in the corner, and then she looked back at the road ahead. She reached over and signed something to her mother, who was in the passenger seat. Patricia Hamilton watched her daughter's hands and smiled, the kind of smile that has grief in it somewhere, and also something stronger than grief. One overlooked deaf woman, one federal agency that believed it had nothing left to learn, one afternoon of crystal clear body cam footage that made that belief impossible to sustain. The system had finally seen what had always been right in front of it. She had made it see.
If you like this video, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next story. Share this video with someone who would appreciate it, and let's keep building this community together. And before you go, drop a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts on what stood out to you the most. Until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and I'll see you in the next.
Upholding justice is a vital pursuit, and understanding acts as your armor. Thank you for joining us and demanding transparency.